Good evening. Welcome to this presentation on psychedelic integration, what we call a metacognitive therapeutic approach. My name's Nigel Denning. I'm a counselling psychologist. I'm the director of integrative psychology and medicine in East Melbourne, and I've been working in the transpersonal field for some 40 years. So I've been spent my entire adult life diving into the world of non-ordinary states. Um, I've um, I'm involved in and have been involved in several deep meditative practices, and I'm currently the president of the Australian Bon Mushdang Foundation, a charity that's devoted to the presentation of Bon Tibetan bonds of Chen meditation to the West. Formerly, I worked for a number of years with Dr. Stanislav Grof, who was with his wife Christina, the founder of the holotropic breathwork model. Stan started his career as a Freudian analyst, working in the psychiatric hospital as a psychiatrist in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, when he one day received a package of vials sent from Sandoz laboratory in Switzerland by a biochemist of the name of Albert Hoffman. Stan and his colleagues sampled the contents of the box that came with a letter from Hoffman saying he thought there may be some psychoactive potential for this particular substance. So they sampled, and Stan famously describes his first LSD trip as a massive numinous experience. It's led him to develop a program working with LSD psychotherapy in the hospital in Prague, where he also did his research PhD on the LSD treatment of people with severe psychiatric disorders. He was then invited to the United States, where he taught at Harvard University and then defected. In those days, Czechoslovakia was on the other side of the Iron Curtain, as it was back then. So he taught at Harvard, and then was invited to join the team that developed a specific research hospital in Maryland, in New England, the United States, where they treated both forensic and psychiatric patients with a very structured LSD therapy quite successfully. Then, when LSD was criminalized throughout the world in the early 70s, once the Maryland hospital, they had about 3 years of an additional research capacity to continue and wind up their research work. And once they closed, Stan was invited down to Esalen, which is an alternative retreat centre on the west coast, California, up at Big Sur, real hub of interest and engagement back in the day. And he took over from Fritz Perls as scholar in residence. That's where he developed holotropic breathwork. So I've been involved in this kind of area. I've trained with Stan. I've been all over the world. I've also been involved in shamanic kind of processes in South America. And in more recent times, I developed with my colleague Trail Dowie, who generally teaches with me. Trail and I developed a certificate of psychedelic-assisted therapy for Mind Medicine Australia. This program was described by Professor David Nutt as the best of its type in the world. Powerful program that we taught about 300 clinicians around the use of psychedelic medicine. since that time, Trail and I have been involved in several psychedelic therapy treatment programs. Um, and yeah, it's been a really interesting journey in this work. Um, and we we really strongly advocate for the use of systematic integration. So um, psychedelic integration is a really structured process of making the most out of a psychedelic experience. What we see, what our position is that psychedelics of themselves are not the change agent. What psychedelics do is give an opportunity for change. Sometimes people are lucky enough to have an experience that simply reorganizes them sufficiently to have a different experience of being in the world that's more positive, more connected. But more often, the changes that come through the psychedelic experience need to be systematically worked into a broader experience. So really kind of operationalized for the client and then narrativized. So we'll talk a little bit about, the approach that we take, and this approach is what our 3-day retreat training is about. It's about delivering um, some real user skills to this work and really helping people to really optimize this opportunity for change in the population. Next. So the growth of psychedelic treatment has been extraordinary over the last few years, as you would all no doubt know. Um, I honestly, in my lifetime, didn't expect this change to occur. I know Rick Doblin. He was a holotropic breath worker way back into the 80s. And Rick ran for many years, a one-man show with Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, and then was able to work with another couple from the holotropic world, Michael and Annie Midhofer, and they developed the first MDMA treatment program for PTSD, as people no doubt would have read or come across. And the Midhofers and Doblin really got the first level of research up and running, and then extended that into an international program. And finally, as we know, got to the phase 3 trials for MDMA treatment for PTSD. The treatment model that MAPS use, if anyone's done the training, and I've trained with MAPS, essentially it's the holotropic breathwork training manual. Um, and it holds a lot of wisdom, but it's also a little dated. Um, and part of that has opened up a whole series of other approaches to psychedelic work. And internationally at the moment, there is something of an absence of agreement on how best to approach integration. And different research teams favour different models. MAPS uses the Groff holotropic approach. Yale, when they launched their program, they were particularly critical of the MAPS approach, which really prioritizes something that's described in their manual and in the Groff work as an internal healing potential. And it's a kind of a mechanism that's really ill-explained and not developed. And so Yale were uncomfortable with this kind of relatively amorphous description. And so they chose through a relatively arbitrary method, they chose acceptance and commitment therapy for their psilocybin treatments. They saw acceptance commitment therapy as the broadest model that they could utilize, but other treatment programs. Other trials use CBT, EMDR. Most recently, there's a real proliferation of internal family systems work in this area. And they're all interesting and they all add something to the mix. But what they don't have is a broad coherence. And this is what we find with all of the models of integration at the moment, is there's something limiting about them, that they don't really hold a broad enough view of all the phenomena that can arise during psychedelic sessions. Thank you. When we think about integration, one of the main questions is what's being integrated? What's the information? What's the phenomenology of experiences? And for simplicity's sake, we've broken it into three kind of clusters of phenomena that are linked to the human developmental process. So the first cluster are pre-personal details. These are, experiences of birth, anaclitic experiences, infancy experiences, experiences that we have up until we get to the beginning of the acquisition of language at the symbolic stage, which is where the infant moves out of an animal brain, a limbic brain purely, and into something that's now becoming more cortical, has a capacity to create some kind of symbolic register, some symbolic meaning to experience. And this is the beginning of the personal stage. And that stage is really where we all kind of exist. It becomes language dominant by the time we're about 5. So it's there that we accumulate all of the embedded structural systems of language, the belief systems of the family, of the community, of the school, of the society, of the nation. All of that is embedded in a linguistic system that we are inducted into as we age and as we adapt. And then there's this other realm that we call the post-personal. It's sometimes referred to as the transpersonal, which is about all of the information that exists to us that sits outside of our common autobiographical knowledge, recognition, reality. And this is the kind of material that can be accessed in deep meditative states, in yogic states, in shamanic states, in artistic, creative immersion, in wandering in nature and connecting with the natural environment. Any of us that have a shift of experience where we're no longer ourselves in our bodies, that we feel a sense of connection with the living world, that in itself is what we would describe as a post-personal state. The experience of bonding with a newborn. All these experiences that adults can have that are really outside the regular day-to-day of the autobiographical self. And when we give someone, particularly psilocybin or LSD or 5-MeO, any of the psychedelics, what we do is we create a profound change in mental organization, and that can elicit experiences from any aspect of the psyche. People can regress into infantile, people can regress into the womb. A lot of Groff's material from his patients recounted a lot of what appeared to be birth experience. And then we can also have experiences that appear to be of other biographical states, animal states, other forms of consciousness, expanded states, connection with the universe, connection with the natural world. We can be connected in suffering as much as we can enjoy, so we don't privilege the valence. of this work. By valence, I mean whether it's positive or negative. Um, we have just a policy of working with whatever and supporting and normalising whatever emerges, positive or negative, either in the pre-personal or post-personal. And that is part of the support and the beginning of integration for people. Thanks. So one of the assumptions that we work with, and this is something that I picked up when I did work with Dan Siegel many years ago. The idea of what is a mind, and Siegel would point to the fact that no one gets lectures about the definition of mind, even though it's the assumption that that's what we're working with, all of us, and that's what we're influencing when we provide psychedelics to people. What we would suggest a mind is a series of processes, of organising processes that interact and move from simplicity to complexity across the lifespan. So rather than being a thing of itself, like here's my mind, what we have are a whole series of processes that we ultimately recognise as mind. And the process of reflecting upon the contents of our mind is what's called mentalization. You might have heard this term from the work of Peter Fonagy and Anthony Bateman, or John Allen, who talk about this process of the mind being able to see itself. It used to refer to thinking about thinking, but we know it's a little more complex than that. And the contents of the mind are sensations, so sight, sound, touch, smell, taste. Affects, the raw material of the limbic brain that precedes in humans emotions. Emotions are the intersection of affect and cognition for humans. Your dog sitting on your lap is a mass of affects. Sorry, but they don't cogitize their affects into human-like feelings, but they have strong affects and connections and loyalties nonetheless. We then have the symbolic organisation of mind, and this is the thing that we draw our artistic creation from. We draw our inspirations from. It's where we dream. It's where we imagine, we vision. It's this incredibly rich organizing kind of aspect, and it's a very primitive part of our brain. The only psychologists that really look at the symbolic register thoroughly are Jungians, object relations therapists, and to some extent art therapists. But that's the symbolic isn't a kind of a commonly accessed aspect of our psychological kind of research, but for the person in a psychedelic state, it is a massive part of experience, because it's in that symbolic register that anything is possible. We can become eagles. We can enter into the womb of our beginning. We can be other biographical beings. What's happening and what it is, we really don't have strong theory for yet in the West. But nonetheless, what we have is a profound organizing principle. It's so profound that it establishes belief through symbolic organization. So, for instance, it wasn't all that long ago, a few thousand years ago in our history, where people would think it's a really good idea to sacrifice your firstborn to make sure the sun rises the next day. Now that was a real meaningful belief for people. It was so embedded in their symbolic organization that they were able to rationalize this heinous act, because they'd created this association between their inner belief and the experience of the outer world. It's a powerful force, this symbolic register. And it's really what we activate when we're looking at psychedelic change. And then as we emerge from the symbolic, we start to become increasingly abstracted in symbols, and we create symbols called language, which has all sorts of, kind of meanings and has a lot of cultural kind of and family and historical material embedded in it. And as we grow across time, and that's our memory. And so children record memory in very different ways to adults. So by the time we get into full adulthood, our memories are really um, um, procedural. They're event memories. Children remember through their feelings, through their experiences, through symbols. So this is all occurring in the developmental process, and it's all happening through relationship, because none of us can exist as an entity if we haven't experienced sufficient interpersonal relationship. A self is a self because it's experienced other selves. If a child has no contact with adults, their brains don't grow properly. They don't develop the capacities of a functioning adult. We saw this most horrifically years ago with the Romanian orphanage babies, if people remember that, where when the dictator Ceausescu was brought down, it was discovered that they'd set up an orphanage system in Romania under communist principles. So the children were basically housed and fed in large institutions, but it was forbidden to have any interpersonal engagement with them. Thought that that would tamper or taint the children and stop them growing up to become good communists. So when Ceausescu fell, these orphanages opened their doors to Westerners, and these babies, and then by then kind of young children, were adopted throughout the world. And a huge percentage of them had really severe either brain development issues or personality structured issues. I myself personally worked with several of these families where the adolescent children or young adults by that stage received antisocial personality disorder diagnoses due to the extent and length of deprivation that they'd experienced in infancy. So relationship is a hugely important part of our development. And that's why in psychedelic therapy, we work with two therapists, because we need to ensure that when people have regressed into this symbolic state, this non-executive function state, that there are two people there that can support them. It's very, very hard to do this as an individual for a session that could last six or 8 hours. So having two people there, and having two people who are able to constantly attend. What you can never anticipate is when that person in a non-ordinary state finally looks up to find the loving, caring, supportive person in their world. And yeah, we can never anticipate when that will happen. So we have to be constantly on our watch and being really attentive to the relational side of this work. Next. Dan Siegel talks about transdiagnostic integration, consciousness integration. So that's integration of, as it says, states of consciousness. Bilateral is left hemispheric and right hemispheric integration. Vertical integration, which is integration of your own internal experiences, sensate, affective, memory. Memory integration, memory itself, narrative integration, finding a way to create story out of the experience. State integration, so what happened to me then is different to what I'm experiencing now. interpersonal integration, so this is the relational side of things. Temporal integration, so being able to recognize that this has happened in this time and not that time. And transpirational integration, which is really about uh, how we integrate the continuity and connectivity of things. Thanks. Thanks. So integration is all about changing the view. So a metaphor we use is the mountain rising from the forest. And if you're the bushwalker in amongst those trees, all you see are the tree trunks and the branches and the leaves. Um, as you walk towards the mountain, you start to climb up the mountain and you start to see the trees as treetops. And then as you walk a little further, you see the way the trees move across the land, and you see the movement of the whole countryside, the rivers and the tracks, etc. And then you get to the very top of that hill, and you get a panoramic 360-degree view of everything. And so when we talk about the view in psychedelics, we're talking about where people's perspective comes from, how they're seeing things, where they're seeing, where's their view. Thanks. Thanks. And in the view, we're talking about metacognitive skills. We're talking about the way that the mind can see itself. And this is the work of Daniel P. Brown and David Elliott from Boston, from Harvard University. So basic metacognitive skills. So metacognition is the view. It's how and where we're seeing things from, how we're seeing things. And the basic level, making meaning of experiences, understanding one's action plans and goal-oriented behavior, regulating one's state of mind through awareness, recognizing one's influence on another's state of behavior and vice versa, monitoring the accuracy of the state of mind and self-awareness or awareness of another's state of mind. So you can see these are very localized and they're very much about, kind of personal function and the function of an other, but they're views nonetheless. They're an interior view of ourself, moving into a view of another person being having the same processes but being different to us. These are basic reflective metacognitive views. Next. Intermediate metacognitive views as a sort of as we're starting to get a bit further up the mountain, we see more of the detail of our existence. So we get into perspective taking or viewing things from another's viewpoint, which is obviously very important for empathy. Understanding the influence of context on behaviour, optimizing action plans in the face of limitations, seeing beyond given information, delving deeper into underlying assumptions and expectations, acknowledging the relativity of states of mind, recognizing how the past influences one's experiences. Thank you. Advanced metacognitive skills involve adopting a broader supersystemic perspective, developing metacognitive awareness of past, present, self-other, or child-adult orientations, awareness of the mind's coherence and organisation, acknowledging interdependence, expressing ultimate concerns, direct non-representative awareness of broader reality, high level of metacognitive skills such as expansive freedom and wisdom. So when we're talking about integration, what we need to understand is the view of the person, and we need to know them through our preparation, what their ordinary view is. And then as they're emerging from or during psychedelic sessions, starting to recognize what views they're experiencing so that as they emerge from the medicine session, we're able to help them meaning make and narrativize very, very slowly and gradually over a course of a week the content and experience of that session. Thank you. So it creates a view, the metacognitive position. So, and it begins with awareness in mind. So that's, like I know I'm hungry or I know I'm angry. That's a view from in mind, and that's sort of being able to kind of process the contents of mind. I'm angry, I'm going to act. I'm angry, I'm not going to act. That's being involved in your mind. Then you start to see mind as context. And that means you start to see mind as an interrelational um, uh, process, the context of your mind. You see the mind as part of education, or part of society, or part of relationship. You see it as something that's experienced and influenced by the outside. And then finally, mind as context, where you see mind as a boundless expression of all things, that everything is mind, that, mind is simply a process. And so, when I come back into my autobiographical mind, I'm operating as Nigel, and I'm able to see the world as Nigel, but I recognize that Nigel is also interconnected with a whole series of other processes external to me. So that's an increasing level of metacognitive view. And we need to be aware that this is where minds can go during medicine sessions. I might not be constantly in a state where I recognize mind as context, but if my client in a deep psilocybin session has, I don't want to pathologize. I don't want to collapse that into something. I want to help them, but I also don't want it to expand into some kind of manic kind of process. So I want to be able to help the person contextualize and make sense by having an awareness of this. Yeah. We we engage in our work, in our integrative work, a three-phase approach. The default mode network is the kind of the where our mind is when we're daydreaming. It's the kind of structure of our mind in which the phases of the brain are all linked, and it kind of just runs. It's how we've learned to be in the world. We switch that off with a psychedelic. And one of the best ways to help that process of integration from as people are coming out of a medicine session is art, symbolic rendering of experience without, running to meaning making. Second phase is narrative integration, and that happens usually starts the day after a medicine session, where we start turning the experience into a story. And then the final phase, which is really at the end of the neuroplastic 5 or so days of the newness following a psychedelic, is the narrative and meaning making phase. Thank you. So that brings us to an end for this presentation. Um, Welcome you to come, if you're really interested, come to our next training in Brunswick Heads in New South Wales on the 25th to the 27th of July. And please scan here to register. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.